Looking back, we now know Turing had really grasped the idea that the wonders of creation are derived from the simplest of rules. He had, perhaps unexpectedly, taken the first step to a new kind of science. The next step in this story was just as unexpected, and in many ways just as tragic as Turing's. In the early 1950s, around the time of Turing's seminal paper on morphogenesis, a brilliant Russian chemist by the name of Boris Belousov was beginning his own investigations into the chemistry of nature. Deep behind the Iron Curtain, in a lab at the Soviet Ministry of Health, he was beginning to investigate the way our bodies extract energy from sugars. Just like Turing, Belousov was working on a personal project, having just finished a distinguished career as a scientist in the military. In his lab, Belousov had formulated a mixture of chemicals to mimic one part of the process of glucose absorption in the body. The mix of chemicals sat on the lab bench in front of him, clear and colorless while being shaken. As he mixed in the final chemical, the whole solution changed color. Now, this isn't particularly remarkable. If we mix ink into water, it changes color. But then something happened that made no sense at all. The mixture began to go clear again. Belousov was astounded. Chemicals can mix together and react, but they shouldn't be able to go back on themselves to apparently unmix without intervention. You can change from a clear mixture to a colored mixture, fine, but surely not back again. And it got weirder. Belousov's chemicals didn't just spontaneously go into reverse. They oscillated. They switched back and forth from colored to clear, as if they were being driven by some sort of hidden chemical metronome. With meticulous care, Belousov repeated his experiment again and again. It was the same every time. His mixture would cycle from clear to colored and back again, repeatedly. He discovered something that was almost like magic, a physical process that seemed to violate the laws of nature. Convinced he'd discovered something of great importance, Belousov wrote up his findings, keen to share his discovery with the wider world. But when he submitted his paper to a leading Russian scientific journal, he received a wholly unexpected and damning response. The editor of the journal told Belousov that his findings in the lab were quite simply impossible. They contravened the fundamental laws of physics. The only explanation was that Belousov had made a mistake in his experiment, and the work was simply not fit for publication. The rejection crushed Belousov. Deeply insulted by the suggestion his work had been botched, he abandoned his experiments. Soon, he gave up science altogether. The tragic irony was that, divided as they were by the Iron Curtain, Belousov never encountered Turing's work. For if he had, he would have been completely vindicated. It turns out that Belousov's oscillating chemicals, far from contravening the laws of physics, were actually a real-world example of precisely the behavior Turing's equations predicted. While the connection might not appear obvious at first sight, other scientists showed that if you left a variation of Belousov's chemicals unstirred in a petri dish, instead of simply oscillating, they self-organized into shapes. In fact, they go beyond Turing's simple blobs and stripes to create stunningly beautiful structures and patterns out of nowhere.
The amazing and very unexpected thing about the BZ reaction is that someone had discovered a system which essentially reproduces the Turing equations. And so from what looks like a very, very bland solution emerged these astonishing patterns of waves and scrolls and spirals.
Now, this is emphatically not abstract science. The way Belousov's chemicals move as coordinated waves is exactly the way our heart cells are coordinated as they beat. Animal skins and heartbeats. Self-organization seems to operate all over the natural world. So why were the scientific community in Turing and Belousov's day so uninterested or even hostile to this astonishing and beautiful idea? Well, the reason was all too human. Mainstream scientists simply didn't like it. To them, it seemed to run counter to science and all that it had achieved. To change that view would require a truly shocking and completely unexpected discovery. In essence, by the beginning of the 20th century, scientists saw the universe as a giant, complicated mechanical device. Kind of a supersized version of this orrery. The idea was that the universe is a huge and intricate machine that obeys orderly mathematical rules. If you knew the rules of how the machine was configured to start with, as you turn the handle over and over again, it will behave in an entirely predictable way.
Back in the times of Isaac Newton, when people were discovering the laws that drove the universe, they came up with this kind of metaphor of a clockwork universe. The universe looked like a machine which had been set going at the instant of creation and just followed the rules and ticked along, and it was a complicated machine, and therefore complicated things happened. But once you set it going, it would only do one thing. And the message that people drew from this was that anything describable by mathematical rules must actually basically be fairly simple.
Find the mathematics that describes a system, and you can then predict how that system will unfold. That was the big idea. It began with Newton's law of gravity, which can be used to predict how a planet moves around the sun. Scientists soon found many other equations just like it. Newtonian physics seemed like the ultimate crystal ball. It held up the tantalizing possibility that the future could in principle be known. The more careful your measurements are today, the better you can predict what will happen tomorrow. But Newtonianism had a dangerous consequence. If a nice mathematical system that worked in a similar way to my orrery did sometimes become unpredictable, scientists assumed some malign outside force was causing it. Perhaps dirt had got in, perhaps the cogs were wearing out, or perhaps someone had tampered with it.
Basically, we used to think if you saw very irregular behaviour in some problem you're working on, this must be the result of some sort of random outside influences. It couldn't be internally generated. It wasn't an intrinsic part of the problem. It was some other thing impacting on it.
Looked at from this point of view, the whole idea of self-organization seemed absurd. The idea that patterns of the kind Turing and Belousov had found could appear of their own accord without any outside influence was a complete taboo.
6, 5, 4, 3.
The only way for self-organization to be accepted was for the domineering Newtonian view to collapse. But that seemed very unlikely. After all, by the late 60s, it had delivered all the wonders of the modern age.
Beautiful, beautiful. Isn't that something? Magnificent desolation.
But then, at the same time as the moon mission, a small group of scientists, all ardent Newtonians, quite unexpectedly found something wasn't right. Not right at all. During the second half of the 20th century, a devil was found in the detail. A devil that would ultimately shatter the Newtonian dream and plunge us literally into chaos.